And folks, so you understand at home, Nick is on the border between Turkey and Syria as this Turkish offensive begins there. Deliberate effort by Turkish forces, it seems, to scramble cell phone signals so as not to allow communication out. But Nick, if you could still hear me just very quickly, what is the situation with America's, until recently, allies on the ground there, the Kurdish forces who were fighting alongside U.S. forces against ISIS, who say they've been abandoned? What's their status?
Be in no doubt that certainly they are outnumbered, and the Turkish military, the second largest army in NATO, is significantly better equipped and better in numbers. So the fight only really has one conclusion. The issue, of course, for the Syrian Kurds, how long they choose to fight back. They are far more fueled, perhaps ideologically, in their desire to hold on to what they see as a long-term homeland for themselves, but there's been talk of a general call-up for all civilians to assist in resisting the Turkish, what they call invasion here, and, the major, I think, concern for those who've watched, like myself, Syrian Kurds give hundreds, thousands, 10,000 possibly lives in the fight against ISIS with U.S. backing is exactly the resentment they will feel towards the West, towards their U.S. backers, if a NATO member, essentially with a green light, it seems, certainly in their minds, from the White House, begins an assault of this extent. We don't know how big it's going to be, but certainly it's now underway.
4 former White House officials tell Politico that President Trump has discussed giving a lie detector test to every White House staffer. Politico details President Trump's private obsession with polygraphing his team and how he's becoming increasingly paranoid over the leaks following the Ukraine fallout. So let's bring in the reporter who wrote this story, Politico's White House reporter, Daniel Lippman. Daniel, thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. Let
me read a little portion of your reporting. You say, Trump has talked about ordering polygraphs constantly when anything major has leaked, according to a former White House official. He talked about it a lot, said the former official. After reading and watching reports about his presidency, he'd be angry and ask, why can't we stop these things? So tell us more about this. Is this all because of Ukraine, or has this been going on a while?
What my reporting shows is that, this is a constant through his presidency. He talks about this every few weeks. He gets very frustrated at the leaks. And so this started early on in the White House, and it was even discussed in the Trump campaign, which would have been quite something to polygraph campaign staffers. That's not something that really helps morale for any Trump staffers. And so I think this really gets to how the president, he hates these leaks. They make his administration and the White House look bad. And so that's kind of why he's been bringing this up.
Have you been able to determine, or has the president been curious about, why are there so many leaks?
Well, there's a lot of leaks because he's not very loyal to his staffers. And so they're not going to be very loyal back. And plus, I think there's a lot of White House officials who actually want the world and the country and their fellow citizens to know what's going on in the White House because it's important matters of public interest.
The White House put out a statement to Politico and basically says that they don't know what you're talking about, or they haven't heard anything like this. So this is Stephanie Grisham, the White House press secretary, says, I think the president and anyone in his administration have the right to be frustrated and even angry about leaks. Leaking information, which is oftentimes classified, only hurts this country. I have been with the president since July 2015 and can say unequivocally that I have never heard suggesting polygraphs as a way to stop leaks. Your response?
Well, my sources are pretty good. They have direct knowledge of this. It's not hearsay. And maybe, her relationship isn't one with Trump where he's telling her what he wants in terms of this department. But there's even been White House staffers who have volunteered to take polygraphs after they were accused of leaking. And the president himself, he mused about this publicly after that New York Times anonymous op-ed, saying, well, maybe, we should do something like that.
Within the past hour, Turkey started its long-expected military offensive into northeastern Syria.
It appears this all was sparked by a conversation between Donald Trump and President Erdogan, where perhaps Turkey felt they had, quote, a green light.
US troops went to Syria to help defeat ISIS and make sure the group doesn't make a comeback. But President Trump has repeatedly said he wants the US out of Syria altogether.
It is time to give our brave warriors in Syria a warm welcome home.
Despite opposition from his own Pentagon. Turkey has long made it clear that it is opposed to American support for the Kurdish Syrian Democratic Forces, claiming the Kurds are merely a branch of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, which has been fighting a war against the Turkish state since 1984. Turkey calls them terrorists. The Turkish want to set up a 30-kilometre or 18-mile deep safe zone inside Syria along the border, which includes many predominantly Kurdish towns and cities. Turkey also wants to resettle 2 million Syrian refugees there, even though most come from western Syria. The Kurds say the Turkish-American agreement is a stab in the back by the United States. They say they weren't consulted and will resist a Turkish invasion, and now the UN is concerned a Turkish invasion will spark a flood of refugees. For what remains of ISIS, this is all potentially very good news for them. The terror group has lost its caliphate, but still carries out hit-and-run attacks. With Americans pulling back and Kurdish forces busy dealing with the Turks, a vacuum opens up for ISIS to reassert itself in. Already, the Kurds say they're reducing the number of troops guarding ISIS prisoners and their families, increasing the possibility of a breakout. The White House says Turkey will now be responsible for the ISIS prisoners, many of whom entered Syria through Turkey in the first place. With the Kurds under pressure from Turkey and feeling betrayed by their American allies, it's possible they will strike a deal with the regime in Damascus, who are supported by Russia and Iran. And they may in the end be the ultimate winner in all of this.
New indications of just how seriously President Trump is now taking the impeachment inquiry and how seriously he's pushing to keep Republican senators, potential jurors, remember, in line. CNN's Evan Perez is breaking the news. He joins us now. What have you learned?
Well, Anderson, one of the things we've learned is that the president is so consumed with this impeachment inquiry that he's now calling Senator McConnell as many as 3 times a day. Now, this is something that the majority leader has had to deal with before. At the height of the Mueller inquiry, the president was so exercised that he was doing the same thing. Now, what the president is worrying about is keeping senators in line. He is worried about disloyal senators, something he's already started tweeting about in recent days. He says that some senators are not being loyal enough and that they should be holding the line. Now, this is something that McConnell is going to have to be dealing with for the long term, obviously. He wants to make sure senators who are going to be the jurors, should Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats impeach the president, he's going to need those people to hold the line. And the president is increasingly lashing out, telling the majority leader that he believes that some of these senators need to hold the line on what the White House is telling them to do.
He's obviously preoccupied, and you can understand why. But I must tell you, in none of the reporting about what he's preoccupied with is there any mention of what's good for the country, the principles we ought to have as a people, what it is he's trying to uphold. It is all about personal survival and, personally, beating the other side.